It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to my guest today. Joining me is Brian Burns. Now, Brian is the host of a very popular podcast titled The Brutal Truth about Sales and Selling, which is a great name, and author of a book called The Maverick Method, Simplifying the Complex Sale. Brian, welcome to Accelerate.
Great. Thanks, Andy. It's great to be here.
So take a minute to introduce yourself. How'd you get your start in sales? Because I know you were trained as an engineer and then moved into sales.
Yeah, sure. I think we have a similar background and a sense of starting with startups, but I started as an engineer and then became kind of a sales engineer before the sales engineer role really existed. Mm-hmm. It was basically some sales rep would have a sales call and they say, hey, who's free?
That's right.
Or who's willing?
Who's willing? Who knows more than me, which is basically anybody.
Yeah. So I was kind of the ponytail guy who kind of would go out and explain how the product would work. And at dinner one night, I realized over casual conversation that sales rep was making almost 3 times what I was making.
And you were doing all the work.
Well, she did a very good job of introducing me. And then
standing back,
we'd go like an hour and a half on the product. And then she would follow up with a proposal. And I think I could introduce myself and I think I could figure out that proposal part on my own. Mm-hmm. But, since then I've learned that it's a whole lot more than that. And I was dramatically underestimating the amount of effort and complexity.
Sure. But I mean, it is a sort of an interesting conundrum, though, that we see, and especially in tech companies and startups. When I was in charge of sales teams at startups, oftentimes we wouldn't pay commission while we were in the early stages of the company because no sale got done without the engineers being, absolutely involved, as involved as the sales rep, and it didn't. There's no sense of fairness there, paying the sales rep more when they couldn't have possibly gotten the job done without the engineer.
Yeah, it is a conundrum, and it's hard to do right because even when I was a sales engineer, in the following job, there was no bonus. It was pure salary. And when you're traveling a lot and, you're being, kind of forced into very uncomfortable situations at the end of the quarter and and your weekends aren't necessary, and the sales rep would say, well, I can't help you, so I have to go home. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I was reminiscing with somebody once about a boss forcing me. He really wanted to get this order before the end of the quarter. And the customer knew the game, right? They knew that if they just waited, held out, the price was going to get better. And I told him, I said, look, we'll get this order January 1, and the margin will be much better. But I was having to call the customer at home on Christmas Eve, like 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve to get the order. So, yeah, not good stuff in general.
Right. It's very difficult. So then I got into sales, and I just at first, I didn't really like it because it was a lot of stress and you didn't get treated the same way. As an engineer, you were treated as, they replaced commission or bonus with, accolades, I guess. And when not many accolades in sales. No, especially if a deal doesn't come in, no excuses acceptable. But I, very quickly kind of learned the system. And I was always very frustrated because there was tons of sales stuff out there on the door-to-door and the telesales model, the simple sale. Mm-hmm. But there was almost nothing written on the complex sale by anyone who had done it in the last 20 years. So, I constantly was looking for that. And that kind of, motivated me had to come up with it myself.
Sure.
Yeah.
I do want to get into that. But before we get into that, I love that I said the title of your podcast, The Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling. So what are some of these brutal truths?
Yeah. So what I see, and I think I do listen to your podcast, so I'm very familiar with a lot of your views and agree with agree with them. I think that there's two ends of a spectrum. There's the hardworking crowd, the people who I think it's kind of a cop-out, who just say, work hard or grind it out, hustle more. And, I can certainly put the names to that mode. And nobody goes, that's great stuff. But that's a cop-out. It's like no one's going to say, oh, that's bad advice. It's not bad advice. It's good advice, but it's not complete advice.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then at the other end of the spectrum is the silver bullet crowd that says, oh, all you have to do is buy our product, take our methodology, and everything will work perfectly.
300% improvement in sales.
Yeah,
I guarantee it. Right. Those things always drive me nuts when I see that. Every time there's a methodology or some sales trainer or something, it's like these percentages. This is what you're going to experience. It's like, I don't know. I was gonna say it sounded a little Trumpian, but I don't want to get into the political side of things. But it's just, how do people still buy into that these days? Because they are looking for that silver bullet, right?
They want it. And it comes down to managers don't want to understand how the sausage is made. They just want a nice, juicy sausage on their plate. And they treat salespeople kind of like the garbage collector, where they get paid more than the fireman, but the job isn't as clean.
It's a great analogy.
You have to go around, depending on the weather, pick up all this stuff, deal with the smell, and keep a smile, and make sure you put the cans back in the right place. And
unless you're in New York City.
So managers buy into it really easily, and I think that's a lot of the success that you see happening with these advisory companies and consulting companies putting out books with numbers attached to it and referencing this research that is unpublished, unscientific, which is also known as marketing. Yeah. And you call them out and you invite them on your podcast and you want to debate them, and they never want to talk about it because they've never sold.
Right.
And you're like, would you get onto a plane with a pilot who's done a lot of research on flight?
But never flown, right?
Never flown. Or a heart surgeon who's, observed several operations, but never really took a scalpel in his own hand. Those types of things. And that's kind of where the brutal truth kind of comes from, where I think reps today really want to hear, what are they doing wrong? What does work? What's the real meat behind it? And, hear from somebody who's done it, who's kind of, has got the bruises and the war wounds.
Well, one of the things that you talk about in your book and on the podcast and so on is that you refer to as sort of natural selling, but isn't there this trend, though, when we talk about the silver bullet, but there's also this trend to think that somehow automation becomes like the new silver bullet, and that we're going to be able to dispense with this sort of messy person-to-person selling at some point. And I don't see that ever really occurring.
It's gone wrong. It's gone awry. And I think the perfect example of it is the marketing automation space, which has turned into the spam automation space. And what happens is you go to a website because you read a piece of content that's interesting and maybe valuable, but to get the real meat of it, you have to forfeit your email address. Mm-hmm. You didn't want to learn about the company. You didn't want to be contacted. And you probably don't want to be on their list. But you did want that juicy piece of content that, promised a lot of answers. So you give it up. And all of a sudden, now you've got to either unsubscribe or delete or overlook, the bombardment of the, 2 or 3 times a week of their message. And reps are very good at hitting the send button. We can all hit the send button. And we're all looking for the magic script. And we're forgetting that there's a human being on the other end of that email address. And I think automation's great. I love tools. I have
I use them.
I use a ton of them, and I play with them, and I love building lists and coming up with ideas and stuff, but none of it works unless you're really connecting with another person and bringing something to them, giving before you're trying to get.
Yeah, and you see that then with companies that suddenly now a lead becomes just somebody who's downloaded a white paper.
Yeah.
And that sort of compounds the difficulty, right?
It makes it worse. I think the inbound thing has increased the complexity, because even if you read about HubSpot, who's kind of the pioneers in this space, that it causes this enormous problem, because now you've got what are really contacts. And now somebody has to qualify them and turn them into, or identify them as, are they worth something? Are they a prisoner? Are they a consultant in Bangladesh? Who knows who they are? Because they have, M5 at Google, gmail.com.
That's me. That's the address I get when I sign up for ebooks.
Oh, now we know where to find you.
Yeah. I mean, I've become a master at the fake names and the fake email addresses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, or not the fake email addresses, but the ones that have no bearing of resemblance to my name or anything. So it seems like there is this danger of sort of burning out prospect pools.
I think it's going to happen. I think because we're really at a tipping point right now where email addresses are becoming visible. There's enough tools and technologies out there to get, because that's kind of one of the last bastions of privacy. On LinkedIn, we kind of know how to do it and either block the person or unconnect from the person. Twitter, we just ignore because the stream is too fast. We can't possibly keep up with it.
Well, just like our inbox.
Our inbox is turning into that.
Twitter, right? Exactly.
Yeah. And what's happening is that reps are now, with these spam machine guns and the cadence machine guns, they're missing the point. The point is to come up with a way to scale your activity, not to annoy people or just, try and do a lot of things that aren't going to add value.
But and that's sort of a segue question. So it's really managers that are missing the point, not necessarily reps. I mean, reps are sort of injected into this process, but I think what's hard in some of these environments is to do sort of what you talk about in your book, is become this maverick, become the rep who sort of defies convention and says there's a better way to do things and maybe pioneers that.
Yeah.
It seems like that's getting harder and harder for them to do, especially given sort of the focus on these activity metrics that really don't relate to quality.
It is. And in a lot of ways, I think we're going backwards in sales. I think the division of labor is good, but the KPIs are gone mad. The CRMs and the dashboards should be informational, because once you tell somebody that you're going to start measuring something, they're going to do it because they know that you want to see it. Mm-hmm. But they may fake it. And I'm talking now 20 years ago, I worked for a company where I was the first outside guy they hired. And I get to know all the inside guys, and I worked on the enterprise deals. They worked on the smaller deals, and they all had KPIs, and they all would call the movie theater 20 times a day to get their numbers up. The call times.
Those are the days.
Right. And it's like the manager would smile and nod, and they'd all roll their eyes. And it's like, you're not accomplishing anything there. What you want to do is find that maverick who finds a new way of doing it. Somebody who finds a way on Twitter or LinkedIn or through their network or through some tool to be able to find, connect, and engage with people in an authentic way.
Well, I think it's really the path to success, right? I mean, I think you're talking about being authentic. I mean, I think that for a rep, and I look at my own experiences, and I've talked about this in blogs and so on, as I certainly didn't fit the mold of, at the time, of a typical salesperson, is I had to find out a way to do it that fit with me and the way I was and my strengths and my skills, and it didn't comply with the standard process that everybody else was using. It used to drive my bosses nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, because, in my background, because usually I was one of the only salespeople who had a technical background, I wasn't the golf playing, martini drinking.
No, me neither. All right.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, people don't know how to relate to you. Why aren't you fitting in? And this is kind of how I empathize with women in sales, where they kind of don't fit into certain things, but yet in other ways, they're insanely effective. So
Yes.
So I had a way of connecting, through users groups of my product, because I could talk to the engineers and they'd be shocked that, a guy with a tie, could do anything other than give the pricing.
Oh gosh. So, all right. So you have getting to the Maverick. I mean, you've got a list of 5 qualities, which I love the qualities because I feel like I could have written them myself. Is you talk about, a Maverick is somebody who's proactive, they're intelligent. We'll unpack these in a second. Motivated, competitive, and creative. And what I love about it is that nowhere in there was there hunter, closer, aggressive, extrovert. These labels that still, to an incredibly high degree, I see companies put into their job postings or job descriptions when they're looking for new sales candidates, sometimes even sales management.
Yeah, because how many interviews did you come out of where the feedback was he wasn't salesy enough?
Yeah, I'm sure several.
Right? That's what I heard from headhunters. And the coaching I'd always get is, go have a couple of cups of coffee before you meet the guy. And people have this
Because you have to get amped up, right?
You got to get amped up, and they want somebody bouncing around that's going to grab you by the neck and not going to leave until you get the order. And some markets exist that way, selling cars maybe, or, selling door to door. That worked because the aggressiveness and the transactional nature of it worked. But if you're selling a complex product that people don't really understand, not sure why they need it yet, costs a lot of money, takes multiple calls to get someone to understand it and appreciate the value and to get the money and the piece of paper out of the company, people don't want to deal with that personality very long. And I've had clients where they've asked me not to bring my manager in because...
Oh, I've had that. Absolutely. Yeah, I remember sort of tiptoeing around the office on multiple occasions. I mean, I had one boss who was the absolute mentor for me. But when he sort of got it in his mind that the prospect wasn't serious, yeah, it was Katie bar the door. I mean, you couldn't bring him in front of the prospect. Because I had one time where going out to close a big deal, and he gets up and walks out in the middle of a meeting and accuses the prospect of not being serious, which was a great technique at the time. But this is like one of the biggest deals I've ever worked on. My jaw just dropped as I watched him walk out the door.
Yeah. I mean, I worked for a guy out of Manhattan who was used to selling into the financial services group, but it was in the tornado. There was a tremendous amount of demand for the product. Mm-hmm. And he talked like people in Manhattan talk, which is, several words per minute higher than people in Virginia, where we were. And the client actually asked him, "Did you used to sell vacuum cleaners?" And he didn't get the joke.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. So getting back to your list of five qualities, we have time to go through those, is you talk about being proactive. And I know people are going to confuse that with being aggressive, but you're really talking about inspiring and leading prospects. Which is really the job of a sales rep. And it's not to manipulate, persuade, or convince. You have to inspire and lead.
You do. And you got to understand that you may know how to sell, but they do not know how to buy. I mean, that they may know how to determine what they like, but if you work in a medium to a large company, you may have not have marshaled a purchase request from initiation to closure before. And that, for anybody who's done the complex sale, knows that deals don't really die during the first meeting. You really have to be kind of a C player not to get the first meeting right, where you leave and everybody's happy. They die shortly after that, when somebody realizes all the work and administration and pieces that have to be put in place to get that order through an email to you or fax to you back in the day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even as you talk about, just it's daunting when you're the buyer and you said they don't have a lot of experience with this, and suddenly they look at, okay, well, there's like 6 other people have to coordinate and have input on this, and that just sounds tiring.
It sounds tiring, and the first time they hear no, they believe it. They don't know how to recover from it. They don't know how to justify it. They don't know the legal process. They don't know, the shipping and receiving process, the installation, the impact that it'll have. They think budget. They go, well, where is this elusive budget that someone's managing? It's like it doesn't exist, right? It's like whatever we can afford, whatever makes sense, is what the budget is.
Yeah, because oftentimes in those scenarios, you're not. If you're fortunate, and I've been fortunate time in the past, as working some really big deals where I met my counterpart inside the buyer's organization, the Maverick inside there, and they could be the inspiration, the leadership on their end to get things done. But absent that person, the qualities you talk about really become important, because not only do you have to inspire, you have to be open to learning, as you talk about being intelligent. Because every deal is different. The complex sale, there are no really prescribed steps.
Right. And often you're working for somebody who doesn't understand it as well, because often in these startups, they don't hire people who used to do startups. They hire people who come from the previous hot company, the Cisco, the Oracle, the Google, the hot company. And that person was very good at scaling the organization, but not very good at, initiating brand new, net new deals, which is very different.
Oh, yeah, extremely. A completely different skill.
Yes.
And actually, I think a lot of times companies make a mistake because they bring this person on too soon to scale, because they really haven't gone through the learning curve to know what the ultimate target is.
Yeah. They believe their own slide deck that they sold the investors on, that it's, straight up and to the right.
Yeah. Never seen that before.
No?
Yeah.
I think everyone uses the same chart. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's sort of interesting, because I think to your point, it really is a completely different skill set. Those first sales, especially if it's a large, complex sale, is how do you get those first customers, and how to really understand the lesson of what you learn from selling to them.
Yeah, because a lot of people grew up in kind of what I call the beauty contest market, where the market's already established and there's 5 contenders, and they all come in for the talent episode, the bikini episode, ask the questions, how would you save the world? And you looked at it as a commodity. And that's a different sale, and that's complex in and of itself. But before that market is established, there's the what is it and why do I need it market. That, and with the companies like 0 to 10 million, and there might be 3 or 4 people at different stages that have some kind of product out there, and you're one of the first salespeople hired, and they give you a laptop and they go, well, here's your quota, see you in 3 months. And you're out there trying to make stuff happen. That's a very different sale.
Yeah. Well, I have one startup I worked for where I was brought in to build a commercial part of the business. They were sort of a small defense contractor, and they wanted to do some commercial business. And the charter was, we didn't have a product. It was basically, we can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Just
as long as the customer pays for it.
Yeah.
And they're talking about paying for the development of it, not just the paying for the product. Yeah. The customer had to pay for the engineering costs as well. So that was a fairly blank slate.
Yeah, and that's creativity.
That's the creativity. So, and that's not somebody that's scaling. I mean, I have to admit, I'm not the scaling guy. I'm the front end. Somebody had a great somebody I spoke to recently, a great description that called that Renaissance salespeople, the Renaissance rep. The people that come in and sort of can synthesize on multiple fronts, as you talk about. Proactive, intelligent, motivated, competitive, creative. Synthesize those qualities together because you're selling a vision of something that's not cast in concrete.
And that's it. And I think most reps today, even though they might be more mature markets, they're probably not given a cherry territory. They're probably given a brand new slice of a territory that no one cared about, that doesn't really fit the exact demographics that really work for them, and they're not given all the resources that they need. So all of us have to kind of be creative in that space.
Yeah. Well, that's that. If you're in that place as a rep where you're not getting the cherry territory, that really sucks. And I've had to go into lots of companies and sort of help them say, okay, after these first 4 reps you hired, everybody else has failed. Now, there's a reason for that, is that these 4 have all of the business.
Yes.
Yeah, and you have to start reallocating that. Another tough challenge. So before we get to the last segment of the show, so I just wanted to ask her one question about back to the brutal truth. So why is it that some of these people that have these methodologies are just not adapting them to what's really occurring in the world today?
I think it's hard. I think it's also that they haven't sold, that the facilitators haven't sold themselves. They're pretty much facilitators. And I'm sure you were put through all the major methodologies, and I liked it. I liked the courses, but they really didn't fit what I did, and that's why I had to kind of come up with something on my own, because the problem wasn't how I asked questions and in what sequence I asked questions. The problem was that deals got stuck. Deals would get stuck, and I had to break the sale into the tiny pieces that really have to take place, and nobody talked about that because the people who wrote those courses sold in the 80s. In the 90s, they were managers, and they then retire and they come up with a course. And today, we're kind of replacing that with, all you need is this 100-page book about what worked at this mega company. And I basically did what someone else did, and we call it something else. And you're like, okay.
Sales 2.0.
Yeah, and it's already obsolete.
Right.
Because how many times do you get emails? Well, who's responsible for buying airplanes at your company?
Well, that's an extreme example. It's a great question, yeah, because I've got a couple that I'm actually sort of dueling back and forth with these days. Because now I take pleasure. I sort of stop being passive in the face of some of these, and I start responding. And it's like, yeah, I understand that this was an automated mail, part of your cadence. You sent it to me. Somehow you got my name, maybe at a trade show, I breezed by your booth and you scanned a badge or something. But do you understand the effect this is having, not just on me, but all of your prospects?
Yeah.
Because it's clear you haven't done even the minutest bit of research into who I am and so on. I went through one company, a SaaS company in San Francisco that was selling enterprise level data management solutions, and an SDR was reaching out to me and wanted to set up a meeting with a regional VP that was going to be in my area.
Imagine how happy he'd be.
Yeah, well, the regional VP was a woman. So I wrote to the regional VP and said, found her email on LinkedIn. And I wrote to her and I said, look, I got this email. Obviously, I'm not a prospect for this. So what percentage of your SDR's time are they spending doing outreach to people that in no way could ever be a prospect for your product? Yeah. And how does that flow through your process? And wouldn't you like to hear about a better way to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I never got a response. But
no, because you can count emails. You can't really quantify quality. And that's the missing piece, because that really takes effort. Looking at a dashboard, you can just check the dashboard off. Sitting down with a rep and say, hey, check out Andy's LinkedIn profile. Oh, he's got a training company. Probably not in our demographic. Might be a great referral, might be a great person to have in your network, but he's not a customer.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the trouble with the dashboards. It makes everybody a manager, right?
Yeah.
I was at a conference not that long ago, a couple months ago, where one of the themes was that in essence, I'll boil it down to is stop coaching your sales reps. And it's like, seriously? Yeah. One-on-ones are a waste of time.
Oh, good.
And there was like this applause from the audience that was listening to the talk. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay. Interesting. I don't think that's the case. And everybody's listening. They're not a waste of time if they're done right. So anyway, all right, we're going to move to the last segment of my show. We're going to have you back and get into your book, because we really didn't have time to do that, but we definitely would love to at some point. So got some standard questions I ask all my guests, and the first one's a hypothetical scenario. And in this scenario, you, Brian, have just been hired as VP of sales at a company whose sales have stalled out. And CEO, board, anxious to get sales unstuck and back on track. And, sales turnaround has to begin somewhere. So you're in charge. What 2 steps would you take your first week on the job that could have the biggest impact in terms of starting to turn things around?
Well, seeing as I do this for a living, and I've heard so many responses on your podcast, and everyone kind of colors it into what they do. But I think since it's stalled, you got to ask yourself what changed. And I typically start with the rep who's doing the best. Then I ask the manager, who's the rep who should not be doing really well, but is? The person who you say, like, I couldn't imagine that person being successful at sales, but he's killing it, or she's killing it. And I interview them. And then I go down to the C players, the people who are disgruntled, and I'll ask, where do deals get stuck? What happens? Are you not getting enough leads? Are you running into competition? And you really got to dissect that. And what's scary is that more often than not, it's not really a sales problem. Something changed. Either a new competitor came out, someone lowered their price, support sucks, the product isn't keeping up, somebody left marketing, and all of a sudden the leads stopped. Something changed, and trying to unravel that. Unfortunately, most of the time, it's not within the sales group. Sales can always get better. I mean, there's no max that we run into. But if services change with one client, it happened. I found out that they bring in the deal, but then the deal would get hosed in support. No one would get called back. The customer would get upset, and the salespeople would get disgruntled because they're like, I kill myself for 3 months to get this started, and then it drops. So I think that the diagnosing of the illness before you start medicating, I think, is really important.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's as I've talked about before, is we all have these biases, right? These filters.
Yeah.
When I look at the product. As you talk about so many of the guests, because I've asked this question over 250 times, the bias is always to sales.
Yeah, if you have a content person on, they'll say, well, I'll look at the content and see what's the cause that problem there. Or you get somebody who's a CRM person. Oh, I think the CRM is in the way. And it's like, it might be, but I think you really have to diagnose it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so some rapid fire questions for you. You can give me one-word answers or expound if you wish. And the first one is, when you, Brian, are out selling your services, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
I think it's my curiosity. And I think the key thing I think that's worked for me in sales is I kind of put myself in the other person's place. And I really try and understand what they're facing, what they care about, and what they need to do to make it happen.
Okay, excellent. Who's your sales role model?
I would think my parents were both salespeople.
Interesting. Both mom and dad.
Yeah. Completely different approaches.
Yeah.
But equally successful. So I think I grew up in that environment where, every time something went wrong, they would explain why it went wrong. That, you were just thinking about yourself. You're not understanding what the other person's going through, and, it's a politician would go crooked. They'd always say, well, that's whatever's in his best interest. That's what they're going to do. So you kind of understood human motivation. Yeah.
And the thing I love about that answer is that we have this tendency, we all have, as we all came of age, to think that we've reinvented everything that went before us, right?
Absolutely.
So in our generation, we reinvented sales because everybody before us was Willie Loman, sat carrying a bag, and so on. As you learned these lessons from your parents, these are
timeless.
These are sort of timeless truths about sales and dealing with people. Much like I tell people, you want to read a great book about sales, read Dale Carnegie. I mean,
right.
Written in the 1930s, fabulous book, and still sells, so relevant to today. So I love that answer. Okay. So aside from your own book, and maybe aside from Dale Carnegie, what's one book every salesperson should read?
What I really liked, I think, over the last couple years, Stephen Kotler's book on flow. I'm trying to remember the actual name of it. I had him on my podcast, and it kind of put things together because you read so many books like Tony Robbins stuff on motivation and neurolinguistics programming and everything. But that emotion that we're trying to get, that flow state, if you're able to get that in sales, and certainly over a long period of time, and be able to manage it, is insanely powerful.
Got it. Yeah, no, that sounds great. Well, I'm going to check that one out.
Rise of Superman. That's the title of the
name
book.
Of the book, Rise of Superman.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. And last question for you. What music's on your playlist these days?
I like U2, kind of the 80s and 90s rock and roll, I guess. AC/DC is good too. I know that's a favorite.
It is. It's a big one on the show. AC/DC. Yeah. And it's actually it's cross generations. It's not just people that were young when AC/DC came out. Something still about AC/DC. It's very enduring.
And it's also, I think, a key trigger to get into that flow state. So it's very helpful.
All right, we're going to put that down. I mean, that's originally when I first started the podcast. I asked the question, what sort of got you in the sales frame of mind? But a lot of people, it's like, oh no, I can't listen to music to get. And I was like, gosh, I used to get in the car and I'd find it, put in a CD or whatever it was, and just crank it up to some head pounding, head banging rock to prepare for calls.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you got to be motivated.
You have to. Let's face it, you're driving around, and especially, even today when people are sitting at their desk, a lot of inside people, you get a few hang-ups, you get a few unsubscribes. You need something to get you going again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, go to a room or walk out to your car and spend a couple minutes and just, get amped up. Nothing wrong with that at all. So, well, Brian, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And tell people how they can find out more about you.
Yeah, so I'm all over social. It's Brian Burns on LinkedIn, as well as on Twitter. And it's Maverick Method is the website, and Maverick Method on YouTube as well.
All right. Excellent. Well, good. Well, thanks again. And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And an easy way to do that is to make this podcast accelerate a part of your daily routine, whether you listen on your commute, in the gym, or make it part of your morning sales meeting. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Brian Burns, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.